View from the Gutters presents Back Matter, Episode 15. Welcome to Back Matter, the show where we discuss the wider world of comics and have conversations we don't normally have room for on our ordinary show. On this episode of Back Matter, we discuss copyright, piracy, file sharing, and the new world presented by digital media. Well,
maybe.
Welcome to View from the Gutters presents Back Matter. I am Tobiah Panshin.
I'm Dylan Donaldson.
I'm John Waite.
I'm Kayleigh Fleeman.
And I'm Kit DeForge.
And we are back to Back Matter. Woo! We've been on a hiatus for a little while, but we're bringing it back. We're doing a new season. And for our inaugural episode, we are being joined by Dylan and John, who are the hosts of Arc Reactions.
And Bat Books for Beginners.
And Bat Books for Beginners. And if you're not familiar with Arc Reactions, it's one of the other comic book podcasts in Olympia, because we have several. They did a panel with us at the Olympia Comics Festival about a month ago, and we thought it'd be really cool to collaborate on something.
Thanks very much for having us, man. We're super happy to be here and super happy to get to join in on this inaugural season.
Thanks for being here. And for this episode, we've chosen I think it's going to be a fun topic. Light, not too serious. Nobody's going to get angry and yell because Joe's not here.
I should rip up my notes now because these are serious notes.
Oh my God, yes.
Sorry, I didn't bring the fun notes.
You guys both came walking in here
notes.
with notebooks, not as big as Kayleigh's notebook.
You know what? I really
stickers.
need people to stop judging the size of my notebook. I couldn't find my smaller one, so I grabbed the big one.
He's
Don't
feeling
judge it
inadequate,
based on size.
Kayleigh.
It's beautiful just the way it is.
It's not the size of the notebook. It's the fact that your script is so small on such a large notebook.
Yeah.
I will always notebook shame. Always.
It's rude.
Hashtag notebook shame.
Hashtag notebook
Every
shame.
notebook is beach body ready. If you put a bikini on it, stop notebook shaming.
Can I draw a bikini on it, like right now?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I'm all about
right.
this.
But so for this episode, we're going to be talking about piracy and copyright and
Yes.
fun stuff like that. And so I thought it would be fun to start out just kind of going around the room and kind of talk about how you feel a priori before we've had this conversation about copyright and about piracy. So, Dylan, what's your... how do you feel about the issue?
It is an extremely complex, complicated, hard to nail down one specific feeling or idea on piracy because, on one hand, it being of the internet age, having grown up with the internet, it's a very pervasive and encompassing thing. As a gamer, as a fan of music, as a comic book reader, it's extremely mixed feelings. It's really hard to be defensible in the current times about piracy. But you'd look back in the 90s, it was really kind of something you had to do. So nail down a feeling, complicated.
Nuance?
Nuance.
What is this? I think that is an interesting point regarding the way that things used to be, particularly like in the area of anime. It was very, very difficult to get any kind of official release here. And so the only way that you could get current stuff was to buy bootlegs, buy fan subs.
Yeah, fan sub. I was actually growing up in the internet, I was part of a fan sub community. So it was like, this one of those things where it's, that kind of ties back. There's a conflicting personal tie to it where it's like, it was piracy, but it's providing a service to the fans that otherwise they wouldn't have a means to get to it.
But these days you're saying you feel like there's less of a defense.
Yeah, exactly.
Piracy.
There's less of a defense because globalization happens and everything's much more available. Now, mind you, that's not always the case with YouTube, for example, or Netflix, where there's very much a line of delineation from country to country, from nation to nation. So if you're in Canada, you may not be able to get American stuff and vice versa.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's interesting. John, how do you feel?
Much along the same lines as what Dylan was saying. I think the farther back in history you go, the more things were not necessarily readily available to you, and it made piracy an easier way to get a hold of something rather than tracking down, say, an imported DVD from another country that you hope has an English track on it, to go back to the anime stuff, or getting a fan sub off of some site where someone took their time to translate it from the original language into English for you, and then you don't really know if you're buying that, where that money is going. You don't know if it's going back to the original creator or if it's going to the people who did the fan subs. One thing I did notice today, one of our friends, the guy who did our music for our show, he posted a picture that says, "You'll gladly pay $5 for a cup of coffee that costs cents to make and is gone almost immediately, but you're hesitant to pay $1 for a song that potentially costs thousands of dollars to make and supports the artist." And so there is really a difficult line there of, when is it gouging the customer the cost of a product? It's costing the customer too much, and who knows where that money is going, whether it's going to the distributor and the marketer, and very little is going back to the artist, versus wanting to support the artist and therefore not illegally downloading or buying a bootleg or something like that. So it's a very difficult matter to have a black and white stance on, because there's so much gray area.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I definitely agree with Dylan that as I have matured, because I'm in my 30s now, I pirate much less. I used to be all about, well, I don't want to spend that much money when I can get it for free. And now it's like, okay, what do I care enough about that I absolutely want to support the artist on that? And what do I not care so much about that I'll either forego it or find a way to get it for free that's not illegal? Like you can get stuff from the library. That's a really good way to, like, movies. That's what I do. I get all my movies from the library. It's free rentals, basically. I have to wait a little bit longer to get the DVDs and watch them, but it's a legal way to watch it for free without pirating a movie, or Netflix, or a bunch of these other ways, a bunch of other subscription services and other ways that have sprung up, I'd say, because of piracy.
Now that's actually an interesting question in my mind. Is there a moral difference between downloading a movie and watching it once and then deleting it versus taking that movie out of the library, watching it once and then returning it? You haven't paid either way, but that's definitely an area, a gray area.
I would say the difference on that is the library paid for the movie.
That is true, and I think that's something that we're going to get back to, especially when Kit gets her turn, because
Kit looks like she's chomping at the bit.
As
Kayleigh's turn.
You and our listeners may know, Kit works at a library.
I've never mentioned it 90 times.
Absolutely not.
So, Kayleigh, how do you feel about piracy?
So I find myself downloading a lot of things. When I was younger, it was a lot of music, because I simply couldn't get access to the CDs and things I wanted. It's really hard to find a good Charlotte CD when you live up in the mountains. Yeah, weird. And so I would pirate it. Now that I'm older, I almost exclusively pirate the books that we are going to read for weekly episodes, because I can't afford to buy every single book and decide if I like it. At the same time, there are many books that I want to be able to support the artist with that I have downloaded, and they are on my list at Gabby's to buy. Like, okay, well, as soon as payday rolls around, I'm buying these 3 comics or whatever. So the way I go about pirating now as an adult is way different than as a kid, where it's like, well, I can't afford the CD, or I don't have the access to it, or things like that. And now it's like, well, I want it now and I want to be able to consume it now, but I will get it eventually. I never really pirate anything directly with, like, well, I don't want to pay for it. I think I deserve this as somebody who's on the internet, or whatever, which I think is an entitlement thing that a lot of that piracy culture entails.
Okay. Kit, how about you?
We're all going to feel like there's a little bit of an echo in here, but I think that's only because we've all kind of zeroed in on the 2, I think, main points or topics of piracy, which we keep hearing the word access, and I think the other one is relationship. I think the biggest part of discussing piracy is understanding where access and relationship meet in the mind of a person. Kayleigh, was talking about access limitation in her case is that, if she lived out, somewhere high up in a logging town and you're not, swimming in CD stores, for example. I myself grew up in a small town and we didn't have shopping in my town for quite a long time. You had to drive 20 minutes or more to go somewhere that would take your money because, little insular town, you just didn't support. Like there wasn't enough support there for local businesses to even start if you wanted them to thrive. Things have changed, thankfully, now. But when you don't have that access, it's kind of hard to even build that relationship with the material. If you're closer to where this thing is being made, if you're closer to the source of the creative product or things like that, I think that you're more inclined to form a relationship with the material and the people who create it. If you look at a lot of online or people who are online startup sort of people, they start getting a living when they're forming these relationships with listeners or with fellow people who are fans of their art or their comic or the like, because they engage them. When they engage these people on a level that makes them feel like they're included in something, that forms a relationship. And once that relationship is formed between them, if you give them that access by saying something like, hey, we're releasing this new episode of this new thing, it's pay what you want. You'll be really, really surprised how common it is that somebody will pay you if they feel that they've formed the relationship. But without that access, how are you going to have that? So I think that piracy frequently results from, more largely a lack of access or a lack of understanding of what availability they have. And since we brought up the library issue before, that is a huge point on what the library itself tries to do in acquisition of materials. We're here because not everybody can afford the same stuff. But that does not mean that you checking out and using these items is slighting an artist. There are a lot of cases where we have concern with that, where publishers seem to have it in their heads sometimes that if they offer digital copies, that means less people will pay for their stuff. But what that actually means is we have more money to spend on your stuff when circulation is up. So,
and that's, it's been commented in the past that if libraries didn't already exist, they'd be illegal.
Yeah.
Because publishers would lose their mind at the idea that they could sell one copy to a library and then thousands of people could read it without paying for it.
Well, we're fighting, we've been fighting for years with big publishers like HarperCollins and Scholastic and the like, who don't want us to be able to offer these things to patrons because they feel that they're losing out on money. But what they don't realize is that relationship is going to be formed with these people to continue an interest in their things.
And that's something that I want to get back to really quickly. But you had something you wanted to say, Dylan?
Actually, on the Scholastic and educational material, I actually have a little note on my notebook.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that drives me nuts is the cost of college books. It's outlandish. I'm sorry, but hundreds of dollars for a college book that's not good for the next semester or next iteration of a class is outlandish. It's insane. And to expect a lot of times struggling college students or the parents sending their kid to college to have to pay this every semester for X amount of books, let's say 4 books a semester, that ends up being $500 for however many semesters of college, is just insanity. And there's services out there like half price books. There's services out there like libraries some of the times will have material. But, the issue of piracy is completely flipped on its head when you're talking educational or resource materials or information like that you see on newspapers or sites that are paywalled that are basically withholding information from you to get your money. And I think that is a moral wrong.
It's a disrespectful relationship.
Exactly, 100%.
Why would people want to pay hundreds of dollars for a book or something that is only used briefly? And then you would be surprised that they would be upset about it.
Exactly.
How can you be surprised if you do something like change 3 words in a paragraph in your textbook, call it a different edition, and then have the price difference be $50, $60, $80 from the one that you published? Same damn book.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's not even just changing some words.
Just page numbers.
Yeah, they'll switch around page numbers so that you can't use the old edition because your teacher will say, oh, flip to page 233. And your page, even though that same exact information is somewhere in that book. It's on a different page, so it makes it hard. And that's the whole thing. The whole point of it is, the whole point of it is to screw over students and make as much money as they can.
Well, I see the conversation has gone another track, but to get back to what you said about if libraries didn't exist, they'd be illegal now. I think if you look at certain industries like movies and games and such, we used to have rental stores. Now, obviously, those have kind of gone away with Netflix and things like that have kind of superseded that. But I think if we didn't have libraries set up however long ago the library was invented, not something I've researched, so I don't know when that was set up. What?
Greece.
Okay, really long time ago. But if the library system, like here in the U.S., if it wasn't set up really early on and libraries had existed for basically as long as the U.S. had, I think you would see rental stores for books be a thing that it never really became because of libraries.
That would be interesting.
So I think if the library didn't exist, you would have some form of rental that would kind of do the same thing, but somebody in the middle is then profiting on it, whereas libraries, it's not being profited on.
Right. And
Bookbusters.
my
Yeah, like Blockbuster.
my understanding is that there were private lending libraries going back to the Middle Ages, but that the public library was kind of an invention of the late 18th and early 19th century. Although I could be wrong with that.
It depends on how you choose to define those things, because way back in the time of Romans and Greeks, there were libraries in the interest of the public. Maybe not everyone could actually read, but a lot of that came from access, because we don't have the printing press. Where are you going to keep all that knowledge? Oh, somebody's going to take care of it. So,
and I want to talk
not
about the
wasted.
printing press.
Yeah.
I want to just hit my own point real quick and then move on. As far as my relationship with piracy, I consider myself part of the Napster generation.
Yep.
I was 14 when Napster hit in like 1996 or thereabouts. I spent my entire teenage years on my 33.6 modem, setting it up at 11 o'clock at night after my parents had gone to bed to download all night and then automatically disconnect right before my dad got up in the morning.
You wouldn't steal a car, Toby.
You wouldn't download a car.
I would download the hell out of a car. And as far as I'm concerned regarding piracy, and I know that this might not be the most popular opinion, I'm 100% in favor of it. If I could download a car, I would absolutely do that. I am of the opinion that access is the most important thing, because I think that our relationship to media has changed with the digital age. I think that copyright is, in many ways, an artifact of this era that came into existence with the printing press. And that's kind of where I wanted to go next with this conversation, was to kind of talk a little bit about copyright and what copyright is and where it came from. Because back in the Middle Ages, before the invention of the printing press, copying a book was hard. It took a long time. It was a laborious process. Copyists would make mistakes. It was a huge investiture to make a copy of a book. And no one would ever say, like, hey, you can't do that. If I wrote a book by hand and you went like, hey, can I make a copy of that? I would go, absolutely. Saves me having to do it. Like, why would I not want you to do that? And the printing press kind of came in and upset that, because it suddenly became hugely easy to make copies, lots of copies. Once you set up the printing press, you could just churn out hundreds, thousands of copies. And you suddenly had authors who were trying to produce material for mass consumption that would have somebody come in and just start making copies of their books and not compensate them. And so we had to have this idea of a copyright, a right to make copies that was limited so that authors could make a profit off of their ideas. In the same way that you have patents that protect an inventor, there's this idea that you should be able, that people will go out and make things if you have a protection for them to be able to make a living off of it. But this was originally it was a limited time thing. You would write a book, you would have a copyright for a certain number of years, and then after that, anyone could make a copy without having to compensate you. And over the 20th century, that's really changed. Originally, it was this period of about 30 years, and now I think it's 70, or the life of the author plus 70 years.
that's primarily attributed to Disney. They're the ones who
Absolutely
have worked hard as far as like Mickey Mouse and a few other things to keep their copyright perpetually.
right. And so, like, if we look at, say, Spider-Man, Stan Lee created Spider-Man, and I mean, this is ignoring the fact that it's owned by Marvel, but we're just going to use this as an example. Stan Lee's not dead yet. So let's say that he dropped dead today.
Heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid. Spider-Man would still be under copyright until 2085.
Probably longer.
Probably longer. Sounds like a ridiculous thing. This idea that, no, like this character is protected. It is owned by this person. No one else can use this idea. No one else can make something that's Spider-Man. And I think that that's really changed people's relationship with the concept of ideas and of intellectual property. It used to be a thing where, you know, something would enter into the public consciousness. Old songs where people would, after a certain amount of time, just be able to copy old songs and play them and record them and use them. People would be able to take something like Superman and use him because he is such a part of the culture. It was this kind of idea that after a certain point, it belonged to society as a whole. And I think that that's something really important to consider to our relationship with piracy, is this new idea that when you come up with something, you own that basically forever, for your entire life and almost a century after that. What do you guys think about this?
I have an opinion on that. It has to do with patents more than anything. You have a lot of problems with patent trolls, people who will get a hold of patents and then just wait for somebody to screw up and then sue the hell out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think copyright, much like a patent, you really have to look at the benefit it can provide and the benefit to society it can provide. A good example of this is Elon Musk, who has basically said, yeah, all my patents for my electrical batteries and everything that makes the Tesla run phenomenally and makes it a clean running everything, I'm not going to hold on to those. I'm putting those patents out in the world. Go forth and create great things with them, every other car industry out there. Because he knows it's going to benefit the society as a whole in a great way. Now, with copyright, yeah, you have the concept of the control of the character and the controlling what is done with that character. Obviously, you can't have Superman going out there and being racist or anti-Semitic or transphobic or what have you, because that's going to you put that out and it's like, yeah, it's allowed because, you know, it belongs to society. You have to hope that there's a certain reverence. There's no control over that reverence. So you really want to hope for the best. You want to be an optimist. You want to be, you know, yeah, society is going to do great things because we give them the means to. But let's face it, society's crap. People are crap. I'm sorry to be a downer, but people suck. And you're always going to have people who are going to go out there, and maybe it's not the majority. Maybe it's a very small vocal minority. But they're going to take whatever you give them, and they're going to, and it could be something creatively and artistically beautiful. But generally, it's going to be something really, really messed up.
Well, to kind of go off of that, you have Calvin and Hobbes, which is still being protected by copyright, and he refuses to let it go. Like, he is holding on to it for as long as he can, and won't allow any sort of licensing with that. And in many ways, that has protected that character and his works in ways that other comics of like similar stature, similar standing have been absolutely destroyed.
The integrity.
Yeah.
The integrity of the character.
Well, and you already see people do a Calvin-looking character who's
peeing on something.
Yeah, peeing on something, or is praying in front of a cross, or whatever, right? And it's by making sure that it's not actually Calvin, you still protect that character. And I think in that case, a copyright is incredibly helpful and allows this integrity to stay.
One thing I would contribute to this discussion is look at medicine. So copyright or patents, I guess, in medicine are for 7 years, I believe, unless I'm wrong. And that is during that period of time, once a new medicine has been invented or found, for 7 years you can't have a generic. So if it's a cure for cancer, we get it tomorrow. For 7 years, that pill is what you have to get. But then after 7 years, anyone can reproduce that pill at a generic price, and that drives the cost of healthcare down dramatically once the generics are allowed. Now, it's a little bit different with an intellectual piece, I think. Like you were saying with Tesla, it's kind of the same thing. He had the patent for a while, maybe made a little money off of it, maybe he didn't. I'm not really sure. But he's releasing it for the greater good, much like the medicine is released for the greater good. With an intellectual property, it's a little different. I think it's more like what Kayleigh was saying. They're trying to protect their property, and they may choose to license it out, like we see with Spider-Man was licensed to Sony for making films. But they don't have to. They can control it. Now, I think the 70-plus years after the creator dies is a little bit much, but I don't know where that sweet spot is. I don't know when it should go into public consciousness. I mean, one of my favorite things ever, The Wizard of Oz, that's in public consciousness. That thing was written in 1899. L. Frank Baum is long dead. It's been more than the 75 years. And look at what we got once it was in public consciousness with Wicked.
Exactly.
I think that's an excellent contribution to the world of Oz. That
we
was
also
allowed
got
because
Franco.
And I think that's
just isn't.
That's really the heart of the argument, is that nobody's saying like you shouldn't ever have copyright, but that there should be a certain limit, and probably less than what it is now, where it's like, okay, you've done Calvin and Hobbes for he did it for 10 or 15 years or whatever, and it's been 25 years since then. He's obviously not going to do anything else with it. Is there a certain point where other people should be allowed to write their Calvin and Hobbes stories? And maybe some of them will be really bad and really offensive, but maybe some of them will be really good and true to the character. We have this whole remix culture online that takes an idea and different people do different things with it. And some of them are good and some of them are not. But technically, legally speaking, like, you shouldn't necessarily be able to do that. And yet people do. And we have this whole very vibrant culture of people taking things and using them and reusing them and making new, interesting things with them.
A DIY and remix culture.
Absolutely.
To piggyback on that, generally those are not for profit. I think the issue comes when you try and profit off of something. Like, I know E.L. James, sorry to bring up 50 Shades of Grey, but that was based off of Twilight fan fiction to begin with, and then she changed it enough to get out from being a derivative work of Twilight so that she could profit off of that work. So there's kind of a fine line there about how many similarities are you allowed to have and still make a profit off of it.
For better or for worse, mostly for worse in the instance of E.L. James, who I believe hates the English language almost as much as she hates women. Yeah, I went there. It forces creativity, which can be a positive aspect of copyright culture, which, maybe it doesn't have very many good things to say about it, but that's definitely something. It forces creativity. Like, yeah, I really love this character. I really love Spider-Man, and I want to work with Spider-Man, but obviously I can't. So I need to create something new and something where I can tell these stories.
Well, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
When that happens, you end up with Daredevil.
Yeah.
Right? Like, who's like a totally unique character.
An amazing character.
Yeah, it takes on this life of its own, and only good has come from Daredevil, except for sometimes Frank Miller likes to beat the shit out of him. But
Frank Miller, there's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, generally, pretty good things happen with Daredevil.
The concept of forced innovation, which I think is sort of a way to put what you were saying, is great, because look at what's going on with movies right now. It's remake, sequel. You get almost nothing new. And I think if we didn't have this issue with copyright, if everything was fair game, we'd have a very narrow subset of stories that are being told, because no one wants to branch out. No one wants to try something new. It's easy to recreate something, and you can make a quick buck off of it. And creativity would stagnate if we had no copyright, I think.
I think that's true, but on the other hand, let's say that the copyright on Spider-Man had lapsed. There's nothing to say that Marvel couldn't still keep making Spider-Man stuff. It's just that other people could as well. But don't you think that things are a little bit stagnant when a company can create these characters like Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman that date back to the 30s and 40s and just hold on to them forever and just keep making Batman and Superman stories over and over again, and there's nothing to say to them like, hey, why don't you move on? Why don't you make new characters? Why don't you tell different stories with these different characters? Why don't you evolve? I mean, I think it's very telling that we live in a society now where the majority of things seem like they're remakes these days. They're they're bringing back all these cartoons from when we were kids. Transformers and G.I. Joe and Rainbow Bright, or all these things. Gem.
Yeah, God,
they're always going back to the archive, pulling up these intellectual properties. And while it might give me a little bit of a fanboy thrill to go, hey, that thing from when I was a kid is back. That's so cool. Like, it feels like there should be some sort of impetus on these companies to make new things.
Well, I think that's the flip side of the coin, but it has less to do with the copyright and more to do with stagnation. Batman, Superman, et cetera, who, quite frankly, I'm sure a lot of people are tired of seeing DC remake the same two movies over and over. There's nothing really forcing innovation because it's safe. Because why would I go out and put a risk on Guardians of the Galaxy when I can make what I know is going to be a blockbuster, multi-billion-dollar grossing film with Batman or Superman or Batman versus Superman or Batman hanging out at Superman at band camp or Batman and Superman make s'mores or whatever the exact same two movies are over and over again. It's that I think that has less to do with the copyright and more with just the becoming complacent and comfortable with your properties that have a strong fan base.
Let's also, I just think something needs to be said for the perceived ease of the creative process that a lot of people seem to operate under when they justify piracy. There's this greater thing of just kind of like, oh, well, they get plenty of money, or, oh, well, these characters, are so known or this or that it doesn't really matter that I'm ripping this creative person off. Especially when we're sitting here and talking about, well, we've got this sure bet of these pre-established characters, of these things that we know people like. Why would we spend money on creativity? I have to kind of wonder about that, where we're talking about how we want to force creativity, or that's something that a direction that we should take of, oh, well, we really need to make more things, hear new stories, hear new ideas, and use copyright to protect that. I think also there needs to be some discussion of how copyright is showing respect and protection to the insane amount of work that a creative person has to go under to create these things we like in the first place. You look at, again, Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. Okay. The reason that is a thing is because Neil Gaiman sat down and created the Angela character and some other characters for Spawn. And there was this whole thing of, I had to be creative and come up with these things. You're later profiting off of my work and making this thing creative. Why shouldn't I get a cut for the work that I've done for you? And so copyright, I think, is as much about how much power is in whose hands to control and use the characters in that way, as it is to how much respect is being given for the person who had to sit down and come up with an idea. It's you've got the whole thing with Alan Moore and DC and Watchmen. We've got before Watchmen. And it's about retaining control over the person whose creative property was signed off into these people. And I think that it's a little bit more complicated than just like, well, we like this or we like that, because where does parody enter into this too? It's people are going to, if these characters are that well known, if they're pre-established, if everyone knows them, everyone likes them, there's still going to be parody. There's still going to be, X degrees away from something enough to where we don't get in trouble. And that's when you start coming into some of these legal issues, like in the case with Medieval Spawn and everything else, where it was just like, well, this is like 2 or 3 degrees away from his idea, so I won't have to pay him and be respectful of our creative relationship. How do you form better creative relationships with the people who make this content if you're not going to show respect to their process or respect to the work that they did for you? I just kind of want to throw that out there.
It's a wonderful point.
That's an excellent point. I wanted to touch on what Dylan was saying about, I think stagnation is entirely, maybe not entirely, but very much contributed to by copyright. If you look at creator-owned, you look at that creator-owned comics, how innovative they are, and look at all the big name creators that the really ones who are writing well for the big two, Marvel and DC, that have creator-owned comics, they make a lot of their money off the creator-owned comics because they had to go and think up something new, and then copyright then protects that for them, and then they make their money off of that. So I think if we, I think the fact that the copyright is protecting the big two on those causes them to be a little stagnated because they know they don't have to go out and come up with something new to make money. Now, if it wasn't copyrighted at all, then whatever new they came up with, somebody else could start writing for it too. So then it's a whole different ballgame there. But I'm saying if we were to say just release the copyright on all the really old superheroes, and we still had copyright on new things, and they were forced to come up with new things, they would come up with them because it's where they can make more money, because then that is then copyright for them for whatever period of time.
Absolutely.
So I think the stagnation does have a lot to do with copyright.
Well, how much of that is to do with our own culture and you know, turn the mirror on ourselves, man? How much of it is to do with geek culture not willing to accept change? Look at the hubbubaloo that came out of Falcon taking over as Captain America, Jane Foster becoming Thor. People
innovation with the character.
Miles Morales becoming the new Spider-Man, taking over as basically the primary Spider-Man of the Marvel Universe post whatever they're calling it.
Secret Wars, Convergence,
whatever. Flashpoint, I don't know anymore.
Comics, some sort of comic
Infinity,
shit.
some sort of comic bullshit.
459 or something.
Event comic number 7 from 2015.
Well, I think that's a very much a chicken and the egg kind of situation. You know, we've grown up in an environment where we're very used to these characters
We're fed
being
certain things,
protected and continuing and existing for far longer than the lifetime of anybody in this room.
Yeah.
You know, would we be as attached to these characters if there was an impetus for new characters and new things to be constantly created rather than just kind of churning over the old material?
Exactly. And part of the problem is that we as geeks become so attached to certain things that we have an as a culture, an unwillingness to accept change. Now, it's also very hard to develop a character if things are constantly changing and creating, like, Batman's Rogue Gallery. Phenomenal. Spider-Man's Rogue Gallery. This is something that's developed over a course of many, many years and many, many, many different storytellers and decades of a character developing. That being said, now we have a phenomenal Rogue's Gallery, a phenomenal character, but any change to the character causes the entire geek culture just to throw its hands up in the air saying, the world is ending, the sky is falling, Chicken Little, Chicken Little.
Well, and how many of these characters, though, do we have because of the creative arms race between the big two?
Oh, yeah.
If you think about it, if you just sit, Marvel and DC next to each other, you can see the dicks being measured year by year, where basically it's just kind of like, hey, who's the quiet, brooding asshole on this side of the fence? We're going to make another quiet, brooding asshole here, where basically it's so much of Marvel and DC's relationship for years has been trying to figure out a way to rip off the other guy's character in just enough of a way
Sentry,
to where
Superman,
to where it's like, hey, that
the
character
entire
is
Squadron
working.
Supreme.
Thank
Squadron
you.
Supreme.
Yeah,
DC has the Redeemers or something like that. Their own Avengers equivalent.
And that's an excellent point.
Again, like I love Daredevil.
Yes,
I love Daredevil. All right, but if you sit, you can look at you can look on the other side of the fence. It's just like, okay, well, what works about him that we've already seen in DC. Or any of these kind of characters is that we've got our jokey, crazy kind of guy on this side of the fence, and then we've got another one. And half of Batman's Rogue's Gallery, it's like, you'll see mirrors. Like they've mirrored each other for years with these characters. And it's funny because the geek community, after a certain point, they reach this threshold where even they just do not want to admit that this is a character that was ripped off from Marvel by DC, or this is a DC character that someone over at Marvel went, oh shit, it's working too well for them. How do we make one of those?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily
up which came first, Deadpool or Deathstroke.
Yeah, exactly. and it's kind of a funny thing because you'll have this sort of thing that now they're these established characters. Now we're super defensive of them because they're so great and they're so creative. But see, they weren't. Is that when you get enough of this dedication or you get enough of this fanboyism and this slavish affection for this side or that side, you will conveniently ignore that there isn't really that much creativity going on.
Well, you mean Marvel didn't create Thor? What are you talking about?
Yeah, well, see,
And to piggyback off of that, it's the popular ones people get defensive about. You can look at Batman and go, well, he comes from the Shadow and Dick Tracy and a few of these other things that even predate Batman. So it's not
Radio
like
serials
he's original.
Batman. Yeah, he's not.
It's just he became super popular, and now people are defensive about him.
And that actually aligns with something that I wanted to mention, which is what happens when something's under copyright and nobody's publishing it. Kayleigh mentioned at the beginning of the thing that she downloads things that we talk about on the show. And I've done the same thing lots of times, often because it's out of print. You can't get it.
Yeah.
There are things that I want to pitch on the show. Sovereign 7, for example. It's not in print. You can't get it. No one is selling this.
Access.
Yeah. Access.
That's
there are
hard.
lots of comics, even current comics or relatively current comics, where they're just not being published. But you can go on to the Pirate Bay or Kick-Ass Torrents or whatever, and you can get it in 5 minutes.
This podcast brought to you by Pirate Bay and Kick-Ass Torrents.
Well,
I think that there is a legitimate concern when you have things that are being protected by copyright for decades, where the people who have those things aren't putting them out.
I have a question for you regarding that.
Yes.
So if copyright were to go away in the sense of going back to your printing press example, and anyone could make a copy of it and then sell it potentially, do you think we'd have companies pop up that their only purpose was to go find things that haven't been published for a while and make copies of them to sell?
The
Do you think there
answer
would
is
be
they
a market?
exist.
I
pop
think
up
so,
for that?
They
yes.
exist. These
And-
companies exist basically with tons of DVDs that aren't available, in this country. And basically, we had this place, Frank and Sons, Southern California, big comic book swap meet, basically. Best place in the world. It's giant warehouse full of people selling comics, figures, all sorts of geeky stuff. So many of these booths, so many, were dedicated to DVD, third-party DVD people, where basically the whole purpose of their booth, the whole purpose of their business was to find these things that people wanted that weren't under copyright, weren't being published out of print, and to make what many people would see as a fairly high-quality copy of these things you could not have. I wanted a copy of Song of the South, all right?
Oh, wow.
I could download this. I could easily download this sort of thing. Except I get mad at the Disney company, and I fucking hate the Disney company.
Yeah.
But they obviously for reasons of image, basically didn't want this DVD going around because the family company doesn't want to admit to years of racism that's still going on. But I just really wanted a copy of this.
Why?
And I could download it because I collect things that show the sordid history of the Disney company. It's kind of a hobby.
That's kind of an awesome hobby.
Because I hate them so much as a company, but I'm fascinated by how hard they work to hide these things.
See, kids,
Looney
who says
Tunes.
hate can inspire
No,
great things?
no, this is great though, because I get this DVD from this third party thing because I want to be able to be like, have you ever seen Song of the South? And have someone be like, what? And I'm like, see, this is what your precious family company did. When their lead actor got an Academy Award nomination, he couldn't go. They wouldn't let him go because he was black.
Yeah.
All right? So I want
That's so
this
punk
sordid
rock.
bit of their history that they're trying to hide from me. But Looney Tunes, they have tons and tons of screwed up things in their history.
Back in
Oh,
the
God.
40s.
Tons of screwed up cartoons. You know what they did? They published them. They put them in their DVD collections with a disclaimer saying, this is our history. This is what we did. We understand how screwed up that is and how wrong that is. But we also know that there's those of you out there that want that bit of animation history, that they want that thing to be available. And not only did they admit their faults in this, but they also made money off of it because they allowed it to be accessible.
It goes back to perception and allowing, if you hide, how long do you have to, okay, Disney's trying to hide that.
Mm-hmm.
And they continue to try to hide, which is, of course, wrong. They're basically trying to whitewash their history. Kind of like what Before Watchmen did with a lot of their stuff. But that's another topic. I might have a little bit of a thorn in my side about that.
Mm-hmm.
But how? At what point do you admit defeat or admit that you were wrong? And Disney's basically put up the front for so long that they don't know how to bring it down.
What I'm trying to get at, I guess, by bringing this up, though, is that on one side, you have copyright as for the purpose of protecting the creative, the creativity of somebody. or a company or, their content. You also have it as a means to limit access.
Protect an image.
And that's it. That's the protection of the image and the protection of the company. When we have people sitting on things that they have the copyright and access and control to, sometimes we have to wonder why. We have to wonder why it is that they don't want to share it with the world. So we're turning around and going, well, what do you do when this character isn't being used, when this comic isn't being talked about, when these things are not readily available? Why wouldn't they make it readily available? And what happens when somebody wants something and you don't give it to them?
Well, I think that there's also the question of what happens when you don't want something out there, and then that thing goes away. There's lots of software out there written for old computer systems that isn't being published anymore, but you can't legally copy it, even to archive it.
Yes.
And modern systems can't necessarily run that software. And the medium that, it's on hard drives, it's on floppy drives, that stuff degrades.
Oh, yeah.
What happens if swaths of our culture are lost because it's illegal to make copies of these things?
That's the video game question, is that they had this digital archiving project for old video games where they were trying to figure out ways to preserve these things that were only available on floppy or only available for these older systems that would not run any longer. And then you get something like Steam coming around and being like, how do we make this thing that doesn't work for your computer anymore accessible to people again? How do we, there's like porting things, stuff like that.
Good Old Games is another one.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is there is concern of like what is worth saving and what is not worth saving. There are huge movements in the video game industry of people who go, God, do you remember that game? And someone says yes. Or they kind of go, oh, I'm not sure what it is. And God, I wish I could show it to you. But there's no way. What do you do with that? I think that's when we start saying, like, how much is something owned by a culture? Is back to Kayleigh's thoughts about like Calvin and Hobbes. Like a lot of us feel very fondly about those characters and those comics and things. And there's kind of this balancing act that happens between like Bill Watterson's work, Bill Watterson's ethics and his belief about his comic, and the collective consciousness's love and beliefs about these characters and what they've brought to so many people, where someone can sit down and go, do you remember that Calvin and Hobbes comic? But the difference is you can buy these collections and Watterson gets the money, but he gets to decide what it is that he wants to share with you still at that point, and decide whether or not he wants 90,000 plush toys running around, being dragged in the affectionate arms of children through the streets, or whether he wants it plastered on the side of, cups at Burger King, or whether he wants a piece of shit movie to come out, like some CG abomination about his comic strip that, merely because he can't protect it. For example, we've got, what do we see, the trailer for this new Snoopy?
Oh,
movie,
yeah.
And
I have a new Peanuts movie coming out.
And these Garfield movies are everything. And it's just, how much do you want the creative integrity of your work to stand on its own? And how much do you want to make money? That's a decision I think that every artist has to make, and not a decision to be taken lightly. Mm-hmm. Many times the fans want tons and tons of products, tons and tons of shit. But the creator isn't about that. Tove Jansson in the Moomins, in her life, she didn't want tons of shit running around with her Moomins on it. She didn't want people going around getting tattoos of her characters. She said so explicitly. After her death, though, suddenly we have tons of these things, these products with these characters on it. I, for one, am happy about this. But I know for a fact every time I find one of these things that, that the late Miss Johnson would not have wanted this to be a thing. And so it's kind of funny when we talk about the plus 70. Like, what does that really mean? Is that to protect their families? Is that to, create take their work as an investment, as a financial investment in the future and the people that were related to this creative person, and to protect their feelings, I guess, about that person's work?
And I think that raises an interesting question about how much does the author's perspective or their wishes really matter?
Exactly.
And I'll get to you in 1 second, John. I just want to say, we have this entire massive community of fan fiction writers who are illegally, technically, writing derivative works of copyrighted materials that are in many cases in direct opposition to what the author has put down for their characters. And, is that morally wrong? Is it, how does it relate to the author's wishes, and how much do we have to respect what they want versus what society or what the culture wants? If people are demanding more material about a certain thing and the author doesn't want to do it, how far does that author's right to those characters extend?
That's
and I'm
the
not
issue
saying
of
it shouldn't
relationship.
extend at all.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it should extend forever. I'm just, I feel like maybe there's a balance there somewhere. And you wanted to say something, John.
Yeah, we've moved past one point, but you just
no,
brought up...
please drag us back.
No, I want to talk about what you just said there
Okay.
about the author's intention. Fans are clamoring for the original Star Wars to be available digitally or on Blu-ray, and Lucas won't do it because he wants his altered versions. And so unless you find an old VHS or whatever, or someone has ripped it onto digital and you pirate it, you can't get it. And that brings up the question of, once a work is out there, is it still the author's or is it the public's? And the argument against Lucas is, you put that out there for the public, it is now the public's. We want to keep that. We don't want you changing it just because you want to change it. That is ours
special.
now.
The Christmas special.
Wookiee Life Day
Yeah,
special.
and that's
thing.
another
Life
one.
Day.
The Christmas special, he tries to bury that. It's a number of places online you can watch it. But yeah, he wants to disown that completely. But once you put it out there, it is ours.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a perfect opportunity to kind of move this discussion forward a little bit and talk more directly about the act of piracy itself, or let's say the act of copying, because I think that that people commingle the idea of piracy, which I would say is copying for profit, versus sharing, versus putting it out there for free for anybody to grab a copy of it if they want one. Because I think that there is a legitimate argument to be made that somebody downloading a copy of your work isn't necessarily the same thing as stealing it, which I think a lot of people make that argument that you have deprived the artist of something by making a copy. You should have bought that. And I don't know that making a copy of something necessarily translates into, I would have bought this otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a lot of cases, people who are out there downloading things are the people who are interested the most. They're there, we do this podcast, we download stuff because we desperately want to talk about it and we want to share it with people. And I think Kayleigh would agree, we both buy a lot of comics in addition to whatever piracy we might do. And I don't think that we're necessarily alone in that.
Also, I'm just a pirate by nature. But a point that I wanted to bring up is Neil Gaiman. In specific, he has his Tumblr blog, and somebody had asked him not too long ago, I think it was a couple months ago, I can't afford your works. Is it okay if I pirate them? And his response was no. And his reasoning was, I offer a lot of short stories for free. If you want to support me, you'll read those. And I provide those for you. I get the advertising from that. I get traffic from that. So secondly, I have a hard time believing that in this day and age, you really don't have access. We have libraries. We have interlibrary loan. We have, even if your local library doesn't have it, you can go online and request that they
Request for purchase in addition to the collection.
Yeah. You can request it for purchase. You can request that they borrow it from another library. You have options. And so he was saying, I don't support you pirating my books. And he said, I do, however, support sharing of my books. I support people buying used copies of my books because then they're still being loved. The thing that I made, the thing that I worked hard on, the thing that not only I wrote, but I had a hand in the publication of it, and I picked, types of paper or whatever. I made this thing as a complete work of art. That is being loved. And that's what's important to me. Not necessarily that you just read it. And I think that's really important. When you have something that is made to be consumed a certain way, how much of just stealing it or pirating it or whatever is taking away from what it was meant to be?
Well, to reach back on your printing press example as well, Tobiah, may not necessarily printing press up, but if you guys have ever read Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves,
yes,
it is. Yes, thank you.
God, so good,
That's a really good example of why you can't just digitize that.
Exactly. It is later in the book. The font is positioned in a certain way, and there's different things happening all over the page.
God, that book.
Oh, dude, I read it.
Still not done.
I read it in my younger years, and that thing twisted my mind for like months on end, just trying to wrap my head around the sub story and the story and everything. But yeah, it's designed in a certain way to be experienced because it is designed in a certain way. You are supposed to be immersed in the story by the way the type is positioned on the page, and the footnotes becoming entire pages in and of themselves of story and going on. And if you just digitalize it, if you just write it down, it's so hard to capture that experience and capture the way it's put on the page.
And I just need to put out a note for anybody who has not read House of
Read
Leaves. A, read it. B, get the color edition.
Oh, yes.
Make sure you get the color edition.
Oh, my God. Yes, the color edition. Oh.
Don't get the black and white. It's just a travesty.
It doesn't, it's not, it's like listening to an orchestra on monotrack.
Yeah.
There's actually, that's a really good point and a really good question that I want to ask. Is there anyone, and I already know the answer to this question, is there anyone here who has seen the Mona Lisa?
Yes. I have seen the Mona Lisa. It is incredibly small.
That's what everyone says.
Yeah.
Let's see, and this is my thought here, is that if you were to approach most people on the street and say, do you know the Mona Lisa? Most people would say yes, right?
Yeah.
How many of them have gone to see the Mona Lisa? Are you saying then you've gone to see the Mona Lisa?
I was in Paris in the summer of 2012, and that was one of the things I wanted to do is go see the Louvre, and I made sure to go see the Mona Lisa. It's incredibly crowded at all times. Yeah. It's really difficult to get close to it, but I got as close as I needed to get my appreciation of that piece of art in person.
Why did you bother? I mean, it's on the internet.
Because it was there. Because I wanted to go to Paris for a number of reasons, and because I was there and I knew that was probably my only chance ever to experience something the way it was originally presented, in its fullness, because a picture of art is not the fullness of art.
You don't have the texture. You don't have so much.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how high resolution the picture is, it will not match reality.
And that's my question, is how much have we enshrined in our minds the value of something being experienced a certain way too? Is at what point do we hit where something is classic or meant to be seen this way? The Sistine Chapel. Okay. It is meant to be seen this certain way. Why do we have pictures of it if we're meant to see it in the chapel? Like, why are we missing something? A lot of people say
I think you do miss something in that, and you can copy from things and share it as like, look at this work, like House of Leaves. Like, I'm sure there are some, I haven't read it. I'm sure there are some passages in there that can stand kind of on their own, and you can say, this is from this book and this is fantastic. And you go, yes, this is great. This passage is great, or this quote is great, or whatever. And it's not meant to be the full experience, but it is meant to lend an appreciation for this thing for when you do consume it, or to remind you of when you were able to see it or experience it. And I think that's really important. And sometimes copyrights can prevent that, but
to piggyback off of what you're saying, if you've never seen a picture of the Mona Lisa and someone just tells you should go see the Mona Lisa, does that carry as much weight as, oh, look, here's a painting that I may want to go see in person? Or let's say one of the Gutenberg, or one of those projects that archives Bible. One of those projects that archives books online.
Oh yeah, like the online Gutenberg project.
Yeah. Let's say that this book you're talking about is there, and you start reading it. You're like, wow, I think this is really interesting, and I've heard from people say that I should read this in physical form, in color. Let me go find that. And then you go find a copy of it. So I think it can be a gateway to see if you like something, and then you go pick it up because you like it.
Yeah, there's just this larger question, too, that I think we have to consider about privilege and access, too. Like that there is a degree where I think a lot of people will turn and be like, well, you haven't seen this thing unless you've seen it in this way. And this invalidation of somebody else's experience of something where, yes, column A could be that experiencing the Mona Lisa in person gave you a different appreciation for the work than, say, I would have. I've never gone to see the Mona Lisa. But I would have answered that question, yeah, I've seen the Mona Lisa, because I know what the Mona Lisa is, right? I know what it looks like. And we have to kind of ask these questions, too, of like, how much is it an author defining experience? How much, again, right, does the creator have to define the experience of the viewer? And in anything to do with art, there is, again, that relationship of what do you want someone to see? And what are they actually seeing? And it's not just a communication of the medium itself, but it's in your words. It's in what a human being takes from what they're seeing and what they're reading. And at what point you're allowed or not allowed to turn and say, well, that's not what I meant to write. You're not allowed to experience it or remember it this way. This is how it's supposed to be read.
So I want to kind of piggyback off that. How many people, though, would take, I've seen the Mona Lisa, or yeah, I've read House of Leaves digitally with none of the color and none of the font type. Yeah, I've read it. That's a good enough experience for me. So you have a very valid question, a very valid point that, yeah, no, you've seen a picture of the Mona Lisa. You haven't seen the Mona Lisa. But for how many people, which I'd say is probably the majority, is that good enough? It's like, yeah, I've seen it. Why do I need to go to the Louvre and see it? I have to pay money to go to France and go into this crowded place and see it. That's too much hassle. I've seen it. It's good.
Well,
Yeah,
let me frame it in this way.
I would say there's a lot more in the Louvre. In fact, I couldn't see everything in one day.
I'm just saying, for example.
Well,
yeah.
Let me frame it this way. Not everybody has seen Band X live.
Truth.
Yes.
But
If you haven't seen Band X, you haven't lived.
If that band puts out a CD with their music on it, and you can copy that CD at exactly the same quality as the original, you can get high-quality FLAC files that are lossless that are better than CD sound.
Truth.
Is your experience downloading a bunch of high-res FLAC files different than somebody who went out and bought the CD?
Yes.
Is there a qualitative difference between those two things?
Yes.
Yes.
But for how many people is that having just bought the CD and listened to them enough?
Well, I'm not even talking about
Oh.
versus seeing them live. I'm saying for most people, their experience of that work is going to be the CD.
Yeah.
And if you can copy that CD at the same resolution, is that not the same experience?
True.
Well, and I would say if you go to a concert of whatever band it is, it doesn't matter. And it's exactly the same as the CD, I feel ripped off. Because
True.
I
Right.
can sit
Yeah.
home and listen to the CD. I'm going there for a visual experience. I'm going there for maybe extended versions with guitar riffs. I'm going there to hear a slightly different version of something I love that gives me a different experience and maybe a different appreciation of the band. There's a number of bands I've seen live, couldn't stand it, I'll listen to the CD. And then there's other bands like, their music's okay, see them live, like, oh my God, these guys are amazing live. It gives you a whole new appreciation for their music.
Right, but would you necessarily have been at that show to appreciate that music if you hadn't heard them recorded first?
That all depends on why I went to the show in the first place.
Right.
I back when I was in AIT at Fort Gordon, Georgia, never go there. Yeah, John knows, he's from the same community in the Army as I was. There's this place, and I think it, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the club even, but I went there just about every weekend and saw acts and bands that were, one, extremely local, or I actually saw, if you guys have ever heard of the band Silverstein, I saw them back when they were still playing junk clubs. And I got to experience them having never heard them before and saying, this is amazing, this is cool, or this is crap. But I experienced it, bands that, and I'm the type of guy who will go to a venue for bands he's never heard of to experience the music, experience something different. But yeah, very, yeah, I know, I'm a little crazy. I'm getting a little weird look from you, Tobiah.
Just wondering where you're going.
it is so much of a different experience to have seen something live, seen something that you've never experienced before. And I still think that's a very valid experience to have. Whereas, you can go see a band you love, and it's a totally different experience, but you're still experiencing something new. And to download a work you've never even heard of, to pirate it, you're still going to get a completely unique experience. It's going to affect you in a very unique and specific way because you are who you are, and you're going to have a unique experience. So I think it's very dangerous if we discuss invalidating experiences based on the medium or how you consume something.
Yes, Kayleigh.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up was like the difference between just downloading a CD or music versus actually like having this CD or having it as the artist intended. Coheed and Cambria is one of my favorite bands.
Woohoo!
They're great. Their music is packaged a certain way because it's a story. So if you just download 3 or 4 songs from Second Stage Turbine Blade, you're getting a completely different experience than when you have the CD and you've bought it and it has all of the additional materials with it and it has all of the art with it and it's played in a certain order because it's telling a certain story. It's going to be different. And I mean, not every band is like that. Not every CD is like that, but I think it is something to keep in mind. And books, comics, movies, and things are the same way. You're not getting the same experience because things are presented in a certain way, and that is a part of its creation.
Well, you look at like Firefly and Almost Human. Those are shows that they were presented out of order from what the creator was intending them to be presented as. Mm-hmm. As a result, they failed.
Yeah,
oh, God.
absolutely.
I'm so butthurt about Almost Human.
Dude, right? Right?
Such an underappreciated show. Fist bump.
Let's see.
Nerds.
There we go.
Well,
yeah.
What you're getting at, though, with this is Kayleigh knows this about Coheed and Cambria because she has an investment, like an interest and an emotional investment in the creator's work. She knows this information about the way things are supposed to be seen from them because she has formed a relationship as a listener to the creative person to be able to be receptive to that conversation. So what's happening is the band saying, this is how we want you to see and feel and understand this. Kayleigh takes that and runs with it because she respects them as artists. She respects them and the work that they've put out in the past as people that are worthy of listening to. Do you think you're just going to download that CD, or do you think that you're going to do things as they ask you to if you're a fan? I think that that's when we start thinking about, again, the importance of these relationships, because that is the point that Neil can make demands. Neil can afford to make these demands to his fans. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because he accesses them directly through his Tumblr. He talks to people on his social media. He answers questions. He does the legwork necessary as a creative person to be respected for how he wants his work experienced. And I'm pretty sure that if he turns around and tells you, I don't want you to do this, I'd like you to do this, most of the people who like his work enough in the first place would be inclined to listen to him. And I think that that's, again, this jumps into the copyright thing, this jumps into rights, this jumps into creators' intent in the sense that if we have this mutual respect, if we have this relationship that we've built between creative person and consumer, then I think it's a lot easier for them to be able to, the creative people, to get what they need and continue to do the work they love doing in the way they love doing it. Pay what you want. Again, pay what you want works because people think that it's worth the money. How much do you charge for this podcast?
Nothing.
That's what I thought.
And that's something that I really want to talk about. And I was going to bring that up next. I did want to ask you one question as kind of a counterpoint. DC is doing a thing now with pages where the page is cut in half and there is an ad right in the middle of the story.
Yeah.
For years, we've had full page ads in comic books, but we're now having half page ads as well.
They're more invasive.
They're more disruptive. But is that part of the, can that be considered part of the artist's vision, or let's say the creator's vision, the people who are putting it out? Whereas if you download that as a digital file, if you're pirating it, those ads are all cut out. and the pages have been reassembled in something perhaps closer to the way that the artist originally drew them. How is the fact that you are changing that thing in a way that could be argued to be saying making it better? Like, is that a violation of the artist's vision that you are not seeing it with advertisements?
I think that's indicative of the general problems, between the already famous or famously poor work environment to the comics industry, is that as it is, we have artists and writers whose creative visions have to operate underneath this larger banner of these are our characters, these are DC's characters. The things that you're working with, first off, aren't really yours. So you're playing in our sandbox and you're doing it because we let you. Okay. Mm-hmm. And whether or not we have cat turds in there is totally a different thing. But the whole thing is, yes, DC owns these things, but the creative people who are working for them 9 times out of 10 are not creators. They're collage artists. They're mixed media artists. They aren't, in a lot of senses, and I know that isn't a terribly popular thing to say, they are not really the creative fountains. They're not the originators of most of these characters. And so I think that because of this, these larger companies can turn and say, it's not like you've got the creative integrity. It's not like it's your characters, your work, and your story. There are characters. You're contract workers. And I think that in the case of DC especially, it's they had to figure out so many different ways to present their medium and keep people reading it, that is unfortunately just par for the course. I mean, I highly doubt, again, not quite the same experience thing, but just an issue of how media is presented. How many of those people writing in the early 90s were sitting here going, you know what, I'm the artist, I'm doing the cover for this book. More than anything, I want a fucking hollow foil cover. Yeah! Turn that shit or something like that. So he's just like punching this asshole. I don't think most of the artists thought of that. I think DC turns around and
I bet you Rob Liefeld was all about.
And that is why he's such a gem. He's such a
Rob
valuable
Liefeld is all about Foldgate and hollow covers.
Yeah.
Rob got to get that chromium cover.
Rob Liefeld loves chromium.
So with comics, you're already working with stuff, at least for the big two, that is not yours to begin with. And they always have that over your head, is that this isn't yours. These aren't your people. You're just being paid to tell a story with our characters. You're making fan art, but they're still ours.
Yeah, it's fan art.
We're just
pay.
letting you,
But
so, I'm sorry, Kayleigh, a few times I thought I saw you doing a little dance.
Oh,
I could just be. It could just
no,
be my
actually,
imagination.
I
wild.
was doing a little dance. It's unrelated, but I will share it.
Please.
Joss
Yes.
Whedon just announced that he's doing a 6-issue comic series about a female Victorian Batman
Called Twist.
Nice.
So
What
that's-
a ripoff!
that's
I
what
love
was
that
dancing.
man.
So, well,
Not
there you go.
my
Talking
Batman.
about copyright,
Yeah,
when you
didn't
get
we
your
just
own
have this conversation
when you have
about-
your own sandbox.
We did.
Yeah.
But if we're ready to move on a little bit, I want to talk about alternatives, because like it or not, we live in a world now where people can copy things pretty much effortlessly.
Yep.
And they're not going to stop. And we have to kind of accept the fact that we live in this world and think about what alternatives we have and what those could look like. Kit, you've mentioned Pay What You Want a couple of times, and I've mentioned on the show before, I wrote a book a few years ago about role-playing games called The Game Master, and I put it out as a Pay What You Want. I haven't made a whole lot of money for it, nor probably should I have, but I've made more than I would have if I were trying to get it into bookstores, which would probably have been pretty close to pissing up a rope. We're also doing View from the Gutters. It's put out for free. Anybody can listen to it. The more people who listen to it, the better it is for us. We want people to share it and make as many copies as possible, because it makes it more likely that somebody's going to go to our Patreon account and give us money, or buy a t-shirt, or do whatever other kind of monetizing scheme we've come up with. We have specifically tailored this creative endeavor for a world where copying is the norm. But I guess my question is it necessarily fair to expect everyone to do that? To expect everyone to say, like, you just have to suck it up and accept the fact that people are going to swipe your shit, and you have to come up with ways to engage with your audience and convince them to give you money out of the goodness of your heart. And if not, what alternatives are there?
I just think the game's changed. If you think about it, like back to the Sistine Chapel again, why does that exist? That exists because somebody sat and said, yo, this asshole Michelangelo, he's fucking got his shit together. We're going to pay this asshole to do this commissioned work for us. We think that he's worth the money.
Sure, that's exactly what the church thought.
And that's
Exactly.
literally
Word
what
for
the church
word.
said in those words. It's
like you
totally
were
written
there.
there, man. It's like written on a plaque or some
Yeah,
shit.
I thought a pontiff
Yeah.
just walked in here. Like it sounded
Seriously.
such,
Yeah.
such like
I've-
the guy.
Michelangelo asshole, right?
You know what? I've been told that so many times. but see, the whole thing about being an artist, I went to school for this, wasted my money, wasted my time. But one of the things that I got out of this is that they say, yes, you are an artist. Yes, you are a creative person. But the only way that most of you will get to continue doing the things that you want to do, because I majored in painting and illustration, it's not like contrary to popular belief, like, you know, people go, oh, well, paintings are expensive. If you live in Olympia, you look around, you go to the coffee shop, you see tons of paintings, you see tons of things that people have sat down and done a lot of work on, and these things aren't easy. Painting, especially with oil, is not fucking easy, all right? And the materials themselves, incredibly expensive, other than the time that is spent, you know, time-consuming effort of making the thing. Most of the time, you'll see a painting hanging up here, $40. Somebody says $40. Someone says $40 for that. And I'm sitting here chuckling to myself thinking, well, they use cadmium red. That's $8 a bottle. It looks like they used a little bit of this yellow ochre. And if you're actually involved in a particular creative medium, you can sit down and go, see, this is how much money they spent. This is how much time they spent, you know, drawing a comic, producing a podcast, doing all of these things on their own time without capital. And it is a good question of how much should we expect somebody to create things for free without capital, without material, to continue producing those things? How creative we expect them to be, too, with their finances and materials if they don't have that capital? And then what level of quality we should expect without a patron. Patreon is called what it is because art, you know, in the early ages, if you wanted to make paintings, most of these materials were so prohibitively expensive that you had to have a patron. You had to, if you wanted to create it all. And so it's kind of a funny question now to turn around and be like, well, you know, what, you know, should we expect people to do things for free? It all depends on your medium. It all depends on the work that you put into it. Microphones aren't free. You know, this shit isn't free. You know, that's why you ask people to support you. And you've got to hope that your relationship with the people who are listening or the people who are consuming your work is strong enough that they'll want to. And so your game is just as much making the thing as it is figuring out how to get people to like you.
Well, and
enough
selling
to
your
want
idea.
to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have
It's a
to market
different
it.
skill set. You have to be all kinds of people to be a creative person. You can't just be good or skilled. You also have to be personable.
You can't be just a painter. You have to be a marketing genius. You have to
do.
be a people person, service industry. You have to have connections. You have to be able to network really good to get your art out there in the world.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people talk about art as if it's this beautiful little fairy thing that descends upon your shoulder and you're inspired and things just flow out of you like, you know, water from a river. It's not like that. You know, you can be the most
It's
creative
not?
person in the world, but it's not like people will ever see it.
You mean you just can't like fart out a poem at 7:00, go read it at 8, and then walk off stage and get your $1 million?
I do that all the time.
It's such
God
a
damn.
dangerous thing that people believe that creative people just create things because they're, quote, talented. No. Creative people have to be incredibly hardworking to get the stuff that they get. Talent is this really weird construct that allows people to believe that creative people are not worth the money for their time. If you've ever done commission work, if you've ever drawn fan art, if you've ever done things like this, it's amazing the entitlement you get from people saying, why should I have to pay you $10? What is it? You like to draw, don't you?
Mhm.
It's work.
Yeah.
It's all work.
Well, and you get a lot of like commissions for costume pieces or whatever, and people will say, well, what if I just bought the materials? You made it. It's like, well, it's still my time. It's still hard work. Well, I thought you liked to sew. Well, yeah, my own stuff. Like, it's different, right? Or like, if I design something and I decide to sell it, I'm selling my art just as much as the materials I took to make it. And so people will try to reduce it down to base cost of materials and not necessarily give it this attribute of, well, it's art. I'm paying for this to support the artist, not just because I want X item. I think that happens a lot with downloading things. It's like, well, I want this. And it's like, well, yeah, but you should support the person who made it.
Artists aren't charging for their time. 9 times out of 10, they should be charging for their time. But they're already in a culture that with the proliferation of digital media, if you draw something, if you're a fan artist and you draw something and you draw it for one person, you don't know the one person's going to get it. There's already this understanding that your time is not important because something is easily reproducible. That because you create digital art or something like that people can't hold, that suddenly it's worthless in people's mind, but yet it's worth it enough for you to take it.
That's actually something that I did want to talk about a little bit, this commodification of content, where we now live in a digital age where somebody in Singapore and somebody in Massachusetts are on the same level in terms of being able to produce content and put it out there.
Or work together to produce content.
But we have a situation, especially when it comes to like software, where people expect it to be ridiculously cheap. And it's like, oh, this piece of software that it took you 6 months to write, yeah, that's worth $1 if I'm going to pay for it at all. Like, why should I pay for software when so many people are giving it out for free? Why should I pay for your artwork when I can just go on Tumblr or DeviantArt or wherever and just get all the artwork that I want?
I can right-click Save As.
Mm-hmm. Said same artists who want to be paid what they're worth for the things that they create are creating it in Photoshop. How many of these people are paying for Photoshop?
Not me.
How many of them turn around and say, I can't pay $500 or some crazy bullshit because I'm an artist and no one pays me?
Yeah.
What happens when nobody pays anybody else?
And
what happens when nobody respects the work that a person who wrote code did?
And I think that that's really kind of the capstone for this discussion that I really wanted to have, was this idea that trying to commodify and sell your creations may not even necessarily be the best way for you to do something in this day and age, because people aren't necessarily going to appreciate what it's worth. But if you're willing to build a relationship with your audience and say, look, this is what it took to make this. This is how valuable it is, because obviously you're getting something from it, and I deserve to be compensated for doing that. And I think that that's only an argument that you can only make when you are engaged with a community. And I think that some of the places like Steam or like iTunes are antithetical to that idea, because it makes it such a faceless, I'm just going to look at the top 10 list, or I'm just going to search for this kind of thing. And, oh, this one's $1 and all these other ones are $5. I'm going to get the $1 one, even if it's some hastily thrown out piece of crap or something that was, for all intents and purposes, swiped. Somebody looked at an app that somebody else had made, say, I can rip this off and sell it cheaper and make a bunch of money.
King is infamous for doing that. Mm-hmm. The guys who make Candy Crush and all that crap. That's a ripoff of so many things, and they're making bank on it. But yeah, it's so easy to swipe something or say, yeah, I'm just going to create something kind of like it, and I'm going to put it out into the world.
That's put an interesting relationship, though, especially in regard to video games and geek culture, on these creative people. It goes back again to the thing stated before, where it's like your job now becomes, hi, I'm at PAX. My name is, Gabe Newell, who, at this point no one's heard of. But your job then is just kind of like, hey, I made this thing. You came by my booth. This is what my game is like. Do you want to try to play it? Okay, you tried to play it. Here's these funny little cards we had to figure out how to make so that you remember our product. I have to go out there and directly market myself to you. At this point, obviously, he doesn't. But like, you know, you go to PAX and you have all these people who are developing these little games. If people buy those games, in a lot of cases, if you're not a guy with a big platform, a famous, like game developing company,
AAA.
The reason people will do these things, the reason a lot of people will do these things is because they walked up to your booth. They had an interesting conversation. Your thing was creative. Your thing was interesting. Your thing engaged them. You engaged them. You know, whether or not the thing was the greatest thing in the world. You have to figure out how to sell these things. So either it becomes you make better shit so people think it's worth the money, or you be a better business person so people think it's worth the money. I've fought so hard not to bring these guys up through this entire thing. Night Vale guys. Okay. Oh, yeah. Night Vale guys. Free. Mm-hmm. It's all free. You download that shit for free. You turn to someone, you say, I want you to watch it, or rather to listen to it. Well, where do I find it? It's on iTunes. It's free. Okay. But after a certain point, if you've formed that relationship with your listeners, if people really like the intense amount of work that you've done, that you've reached that threshold where you've done an insane amount of work on your own dime, you can start maybe going, hey, what if you maybe supported us, gave us a little bit, like did a monthly donation? That'd be cool of you, is what they always say. Mm-hmm. But then there's a point that you start being able to offer them other things and they'll willingly pay. All right. Hey, we do this exact same thing, only we stand on a stage. We even read on a script. You know, we don't even memorize it. You know, we go out there with the script in our hands. And you'll be able to download this later. You'll be able to download this later for $2 or for free. But you might not. You might instead pay $40 or $30 or whatever to go listen to people read from a script live. And why would you do that if you could get it for free? Because you're so invested in the people that make it or what they do that you're like, I need to go watch these guys read a script. And I think that can only work when you're creating content that engages people enough and have a relationship with people where they're engaged enough with you to think that just looking at your mug is worth an additional $30.
I think I'd have to pay people to look at my mug. But
yeah, there's a reason that this is a radio show instead of a TV show.
But I see, John, you have your hand up. But can I do something real quick? Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, John. John just is mad at me.
I'm shaking fist at you.
John shakes fist at me. So, okay, speaking of Night Vale, something I actually want to bring up because those are the exact same guys I was thinking of. If I were to take Night Vale, transcribe everything that is said on piece of paper and market it, or if I were to take it and record it and basically word for word reproduce it with my own wonderful dulcet tones, I would still be stealing from them though, especially if I charge money.
But they also wouldn't be getting their money's worth. I mean, no offense, dude.
Oh, no. Believe me, I 1,000% agree. I mean, dang. Listen to that guy. It's just amazing, the intensity.
I would pay him to read a shampoo bottle.
If
I become rich, that's the first thing I'm doing.
I win the lotto, shampoo bottle you.
Yeah.
Phone book. But
I think we just came up with a new Patreon donor level.
Yes.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Pay us to read things.
Yeah.
I think this is an excellent topic for all of us because no one is paying us to be here. We're here because we love to do it. But also, we do this with the idea that if it's well-liked enough, it may branch out into something more. Like, we can only read so many comics because all of us have to have full-time jobs to just survive. So if we get to the point where we can do this as a living, then we're doing something we love even more than our full-time jobs and producing much more content than we can. Like Dylan and I, our podcast is once a month because that's the comfortable level that we can do it at. Now, the Bat Books is also once a month, so really it's still 2 times a month. But we backed it down to once a month from 2 times a month because we're like, okay, we're putting too much of our free time into this where it's not necessarily costing us a lot of money because we have means to get the comics outside of buying them if we need to. But also we're still spending some money like to go to conventions and certain other things. So it is still a losing venture, not even counting the amount of time we're putting into it. So putting so much time and a little bit of money into this just because we love to do it. But there's other things we love to do too. And if this is taking all our time, we can't do those. So it comes a balance of how much do you put in just because you love to do it and how much do you do it because it's financially viable?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I think that, that's the real question, is a question of balance. And where do you find that healthy medium between author control versus, the needs of the audience, between being able to share and enjoy things versus a creator being able to say, like, I own this thing, I can put it out in the format that I want, and you can't take it from me. I think that there really is a balance in there somewhere where some author control is good, some audience control is good. Obviously, creators should be compensated for those things, but that isn't to say that people should necessarily be punished for wanting to share the things that they like.
Well, I kind of wanted to bring up, going back to what you were saying about. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No
I'm trash. About what Dylan was saying about Welcome to Night Vale and re-recording, right, and releasing it. And something that happens is the audience starts to protect a work. And you see it happen all the time. I see it with webcomics where somebody will post a message board or something like, hey, you know what? This site is posting your work without a credit.
Shit off.
Yeah. And so the artist can then have them take it down, or even the audience will jump on somebody and say, hey, you take that down. That's not yours. Like,
Didn't
did
that
you
happen
pay
to
for
the
it?
Oatmeal?
Yeah.
Funny Junk or something like that.
Oh, God,
yeah. And he was able to get it taken down after, I think it was like a year or two of fighting.
He's still
for
fighting
it.
as far as I know.
Is he really? Jesus.
Yeah, there's a bunch of websites like that just repost things without attribution, with their
removing
own
watermarks
put on there, removing watermarks.
Mm-hmm.
And like, really, I mean, that's the biggest issue, is not even that they're rehosting something.
They're straight stealing.
It's that they're taking out his attribution so that no one can follow it back to his own website if they want to.
Right.
I can't count the number of times when I saw something on the internet far divorced from its original source and tracked it down to the creator because I wanted to see more of what they were doing. And actively impeding that, I think, is the fucking worst thing in the world. Far worse than any level of file sharing.
There's a webcomic, speaking of which, called, I want to say it's like Chaos Life. Their first comic is about Reddit and Imgur doing that. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we're moving their watermark. Or even if the watermark's just at the bottom of a panel, and just kind of moving the bottom of the panel up just enough so you can't really read, so the watermark's not there, and hosting it. But I did want to touch on something you said earlier, Tobiah. The Sex Criminals. Sex Criminals, phenomenal book, great book, recommend it highly.
Yes.
But the release schedule is so erratic and not consistent because the husband-wife team who are working on it have other stuff going on.
The husband and wife team of Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, his male wife.
Yeah. As long
man
as that's
wife.
understood.
So
Yeah.
I don't know why I was thinking it was a man-wife team.
Kelly Sue's
You're
not
thinking
working
about
on
Kelly.
it.
Yeah, that's right.
Sue,
Kelly
but
Sue's is fine.
They do share a booth.
Yes. My
Which
brain
is
is mush.
adorable.
It's much later than I'm used to recording. Sorry. But I don't know. They could be, they could be a couple. They're pretty cute together, actually.
They are adorable.
But yeah, the release schedule for Sex Criminals is completely erratic. Now, mind you, I'm still addicted to it, even with this large gap between the last episode and the next episode or issues. But that's not always the case for everybody. I know quite a few webcomics have gone on hiatus for a long time and lost a lot of their viewership. The Seattle Geekly podcast in Seattle, great people, had to go on hiatus because the wife had medical issues, so they had to cut out for a long time. Fortunately, they were able to recover pretty well, but still they had a long hiatus where they probably lost more than a few listeners. So at what point does it, when it goes back to what we were saying a long while back about at what point of you not using a character, not using content, or not using an idea, does it become, okay, you haven't used it in X amount of time? What's the line of delineation for that? And who dictates that?
Yeah. I mean, to piggyback on that, it was the 90s. The Spirit was made into a movie.
Yeah.
Totally flopped. Alec Baldwin, I think it was.
No, that was
The Shadow?
Darkman.
Darkman. No,
Darkman came out around that same time, too, but there was one called The Spirit.
The Spirit was,
And
I
also
think,
The
early
Shadow.
2000s. You're thinking that Scarlett Johansson movie?
No, this was like Alec Baldwin. as the main character. It might have been the
She
Shadow.
might have done a Shadow.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that was a Shadow.
Sounds
Sorry,
like the Shadow.
Shadow, not the Spirit.
Okay.
But anyway, it really bombed, and I think that was because it'd been out of the public conscious for so long. Because dating back to movie and radio serials back when that was the big thing, and then it wasn't used for so long that trying to resurrect it. Dick Tracy's another example. I think that was maybe a little more successful.
John Carter of Mars.
Yeah,
That one
Yeah.
flopped.
that's a
That was
really
just
good
on today, and I
example.
was commenting to Dylan about how we've seen so many works that are derivative of this, that then now that we're seeing this being made, we're looking at it and going, I've seen all this before.
This
Yeah,
is
that was
archaic.
exactly my
I've totally
reaction.
seen that shit.
Yeah.
Billy Zane's The Phantom.
Oh, yeah.
The very much the prototype of superheroes. Secret Identity, Secret Lair, all
Long
that
before
stuff.
Batman was Batman.
Long before Batman was Batman. And that movie's wasn't well recognized because people didn't remember The Phantom.
Yo, that guy's just a rip-off of Batman.
Yeah.
You know,
Dude, and if you ever saw The Phantom 2040, I think it was,
Mm.
it was by the same guy who did Aeon Flux. It was on in the 90s.
Didn't he
It
have
was
like a
a
robot
cartoon,
body or?
No, I don't recall that. There was a dude who was like raised in zero gravity who had like a mech suit because his limbs weren't strong enough to support him
That's
on
what
Earth.
it was.
It was super good. Not a lot of people saw it.
I don't think I ever saw it. I remember.
I'm
certain
aware
things
of
about
it, but I don't remember watching it.
I
Yeah.
definitely recommend you check it out.
I will.
It's worth the time.
Tobiah's recommendation.
There you go. So I guess we're kind of reaching a wrap up point. Did anybody have any final thoughts?
Well, I think one thing we haven't really talked about is what piracy has led to. And I did make a list, which is by all means not inclusive, of things that I feel like have come out of piracy.
Oh, please go ahead.
Like Netflix, Scribd for comics, HBO Now, Amazon Prime, Marvel Unlimited, Spotify, Pandora, Steam, Great Old Games, YouTube, watching TV on websites. These are all things that I think we can directly or indirectly contribute to the fact of whether it's the culture of I want it now, or just that people were doing it already and these people saw a way to circumvent that, make money off of it.
monetize habits.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we've seen piracy lead to a better way of consuming in a lot of ways, and a way that isn't completely, if you feel like piracy is ripping off the creator, whether or not all that money gets back to the creator through these various means, it is a way to feel like you're contributing to buy a subscription to these services versus just straight up downloading it without paying for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for my own part, I do pirate stuff, and I don't necessarily feel bad about it, but I also respect the creators whose work I'm taking, and I try and support them as much as possible. And I try and tell people about it and buy books, buy prints, go to cons, talk to them, be engaged to the community. And I think that that's really the important thing. And the reason that I wanted to have this conversation was to kind of dispel this idea that piracy is purely one thing. It's not exclusively good, but it's not exclusively bad either. And I think as much as copyright was a sea change reacting to a new invention, the printing press, I think we have to recognize that digital media and the internet has once again changed the playing field, and that as a community of creators, we need to address how creators are going to be compensated for their creative works, because they really do deserve it, because it is goddamn hard work.
Yep.
I'm going to hop on the other side of the fence and say, not to be self-righteous, but I don't pirate things.
That's
And I'll
completely
tell you
legit.
precisely why. Is because there are those alternatives. There are means to compensate them otherwise. So, for example, in my case, I will go, since I work in the library, and I will borrow these things that I want to read, either for this or for my own use. And what happens in that case is the library gets a circulation number. In a lot of cases, circulation numbers tell the library what is being consumed. And when that happens, they decide what to buy. So if a lot of comics are being consumed because I'm checking them out at the library then decides to earmark a point in their budget where they say, hey, people want to read comics. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy more comics, which in turn means that the people who are creating comics get a little bit more money. Not much, but some. But what happens beyond that point is if this interest is there, the people who are reading comics, who have the access to comics, then become more invested and more interested in them. Maybe at some point later in their life, they remember, when I was little, I used to borrow comics from the library. I am now 35 years old and I borrow comics from the library, but I now have a job. I now have gainful employment. And it has become something so much a part of my life to read comic books that I'm going to go out and I'm going to purchase the ones I like. In my case, access to a lot of books through the library led to an interest in, this geeky media that I enjoy now. So even now that I don't make a ton of money in my job, I'll turn around, check out something, and if it's great, if it hit something, if it struck a chord with me, I'm going to earmark a bit of my limited budget to go down and buy a copy. I've already read the damn thing. People could tell you, you've already read it, you don't need to own it. But what I do then is I turn around and I say, this book was really good. Hang on, let me get it off my shelf. And in that sense, you're sharing. And so it's kind of an interesting thing, I guess, of we have to figure out other ways to show support, other ways to compensate these people for these things. If you're creating interest in a medium, if you're creating interest in somebody's work, eventually it's going to follow that they talk to others. More people might be interested. More people might spend money. Maybe somebody thinks it's great and writes an article about it, and then more people hear. And then they want to give you their money. Yeah. Maybe it strikes more chords with more people. And so I just think it's important that whether it be sharing through your voice, sharing through your experience, getting access to materials through libraries, or even downloading, that's still all fine if it becomes about benefiting the people who are being creative. So when someone says, buy a t-shirt at the concert, if you go and listen to a band and they say, hey, you're great, buy a shirt, they mean it. They actually mean it. Buy a shirt as a means to support them, because you walking around in that t-shirt means people ask you, who's that band? What's that thing?
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I don't remember what I was doing, but I stopped to get lunch on my way, and I walked past a guy wearing a Dream Theater shirt, started up a conversation talking about Dream Theater. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have talked to him otherwise, except I knew Dream Theater from back when I used to listen to him more regularly, and I thought they were awesome, so I was like, hey, I'll have a conversation with this guy. So,
Fun fact, Dream Theater gets more money from you buying a t-shirt than they get from their label.
I was actually about to say that, if you buy a $10 album, the band sees maybe 50 cents. If they're big, like $1. They make $5-10 off a t-shirt at their concert.
Personally, as far as music goes, I would rather pay to go to a concert and buy a t-shirt than I would pay for a CD. Just me personally.
So
that doesn't mean I will go pirate their music per se. I may listen to it through Pandora or some other method that's not piracy. But sure. I feel like those direct interactions, whether it's getting a commission at Comic-Con, going to a concert, buying a t-shirt, since more money goes to the artist, I feel like I'm able to do my part further by doing that, rather than taking that money that I could spend on that and buying 2 or 3 other things that the artists get less for.
And I think that really is about respect for the artist and actually taking the time to figure out, like, hey, like, what's the best way for me to help these guys out? What's the best way for me to support them?
The humor of the situation is your Dream Theater t-shirt situation. That's a situation because of access. CD, do you remember those 12 CDs for a penny? Do you remember those?
Yeah.
Okay. That sort of thing happens when a label started selling a whole bunch of CDs and getting them into a club. What happens then is their artists were directly being fucked by their deals, by their own labels.
Yep.
In order to make money off of the thing that they're actually producing, they have to tour live. They have to do more legwork. They have to engage with fans more in exchange for having them more visible by a label. So this is kind of a balanced thing, is that because music changed, because selling music changed, musicians had to figure out different ways to sell themselves. And with digital media, that's what we're seeing now, is we're seeing a kind of different means to experience media and a different way to engage with an audience. So if your creative person tells you, this is how you can help me, if you respect them, you'll listen. You'll try, at least.
And I think, this is mostly speaking of the music industry. I think with the age of the internet and the age of accessibility, with the large record labels' inability or unwillingness to change with the times, they're antiquating themselves. I'm really hoping I see in my lifetime a digital music revolution where artists are able to put their own music out across their own means and not pay for a studio to distribute. They become their own distributors. We saw, and we talked about Pay What You Want quite a bit. I kept wanting to bring up Radiohead in Rainbows. That's exactly what they did, and they made a mint off of that.
I actually want to mention Pomplamoose.
Pomplamoose, yeah.
That they put all their music out themselves on iTunes.
Yes.
They also make their own music videos in their house and put them all on YouTube that you can listen to for free. And they tour.
Yeah.
And they have t-shirts, they have merchandise, they have I'm sure they have a Patreon. They have monetization schemes that aren't necessarily about controlling the sale or distribution of their songs, but that engages with their audience and provides them with alternate means to maintain themselves.
Yeah, it's providing a means to access, an easy means to access to, what Kit's been hitting on this entire recording quite, brilliantly, is the more access you provide, the wider reaching your audience becomes, and the more means you have to monetize your skill, monetize your talent. And obviously that's not true for everything. A lot of artists, painters it's much harder for them to create that wider reaching net just by nature of their medium. But with music, at least, they're able to create a much wider medium.
But you only get there with passion and dedication.
Truth.
That's the thing, is that you will only ever create those audiences. You will only ever get people willing to support you if you're willing to do the legwork and dedicate the time and stick to a schedule on these things to where people know what to expect from you so that they know what sort of quality that you're willing to bring to the table. So keep in mind that a lot of these people who succeed in these things, who later are able to expect things of their audience, are only able to do so because they have invested a ridiculous amount of their time to little or no return. But I think that their fans see that. If you invest passion, passion will be seen, and passion will be returned. People will protect your materials because they see your passion and your love and your dedication for what you're doing. And that's where the relationship forms.
Totes.
My goats.
Anything else? All right. Well, I want to thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate
Thanks especially to Dylan and John. Arc Reactions Podcast at arcreactionspod.com.
arcreactionspodcast.blogspot.com. We don't have our own domain yet.
There you go.
You can check out Bat Books for Beginners on the BatmanUniverse.net and their little podcast section.
And thank you all for listening. And I hope that you will go out and support a creator today. Hashtag patreon.com/View from the Gutters.
They're not saying who. They're not suggesting anyone in particular.
No, certainly not.
No, but there is this...
It could be anyone at all.
Give me your money.
Hashtag View from the Gutters.
Good night, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this presentation of View from the Gutters. View from the Gutters is featured on theouthousers.com and the Comics Podcast Network. Keep up to date with everything that we're doing on our website at viewfromthegutters.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes, as it does help new listeners find our show. Thanks for listening, everybody. And as always, keep reading.